Alrighty, so first let's do the quiz. Check what's that. Alright, just got to name one type of neural network we discussed last class and do a quick little summary on it. Awesome. So we've, I won't give the answer to this one just because it's, it's on the last slides, but yeah. And so many different ones. We can move on, I think, logistics. So today we're covering conv nets, and the other thing, hopefully we'll finish early because I want to talk a little bit about Lab 1 and Lab 2. But before that, a note, Lab 1 is being extended till next week, and Lab 2 is going to be released this week, but I'm giving you until, I think, 3 weeks or something like that, just to, it fit the time schedule pretty well. So yeah, we'll go on from here. And today, the big boy, conv nets. So abstractly, what are conv nets? It's going to be hard lecture. Abstractly, what are conv nets? These are neural networks that are specifically made for images, and they have special operations in them that let them work well on images. We discussed the fully connected layers before. That's been all of our networks so far, and henceforth we're going to be using them still, but for conv nets they're going to be a minor part, a bit taken over by our resolution and pooling. So why do we need special neural networks for images? Well, part of the problem is images have a lot of higher level meaning inside of them that we as humans can pick up on that it's hard for computers to. And they also have so much data. It's just, if you're working with a 28 by 28 image, you're working with 700 something in data inputs, which you then have to have hidden neurons for, and it doesn't scale well over time, and number of neurons. However, ConvNets can reduce these computational requirements and also be more effective than just a simple neural network for several reasons. So let's talk about the scaling with images part here. Again, we have with MNIST, yeah, we can definitely do that with a normal neural network because we're getting 784 inputs. A normal network can handle that. If we're doing CFAR 10, now we're 32 by 32 by 3, this being our color values. Now we're up to around 3,000. A Facebook profile image, you're trying to classify those for whatever reason, now you're up to 92,000, and so on. If you're doing your 1024 by 1024 RGB value image, you're into millions of neurons just per layer. And that can be a lot of computation that hopefully you can reduce with a convolutional network. Another issue is these flattened images. So if I turn this, just a smaller version of MNIST, if I take this 14 by 14 digit data set here, and I turn it into binary values, and of course it's going to be a lot messier than this too. It's not going to be just zeros and ones. It'll be like 0.5 here, or but we'll simplify it. You can probably tell me just by looking at this data that it's a 1, right? Yeah, it'd be pretty easy to tell. So yeah, it's simplification. This is what the neural net's seeing. It's just seeing one array full of images, and it's not able to necessarily know that there is an intrinsic connection between this point and this point unless it learns it itself. It has to take that step on its own when we already have that information, that this is one above that. So let's talk about how ConvNets actually work. First of all, we need to change our constraints a little. Before we were assuming that we could work with any sort of data, any sort of number of inputs. Now we are working only with images, and therefore we can change the architecture a little. Instead of having just the one flat dimension for inputs, we can assume 3 dimensions, our width, length, and our depth. Depth, of course, going to be our color channels in this case. So I guess you could run it on some sort of 3D representation, but that sounds like a bit much. So in MNIST, of course, now we have that at 784. We can change that back to its native 28 by 28 by 1. No color channels on that because it's just black and white image. And that doesn't, and at this point we haven't changed our number of weights, our computation, but it lets us handle that first problem we were talking about a little more easily with being able to know that one pixel under another isn't independent of itself, of the other one. So we're going to start with the convolutions here. So in a neural network, a convolution is, the job of it is to preserve the spatial relationships between parts of an image while reducing the number of pixels we're dealing with so that we don't have to worry as much about the sufficiency, while also learning things about the image. These are themselves neurons, specialized neurons, but neurons nonetheless. We're going to be using something called a filter. It's going to slide along the image, and it's going to take in inputs of a certain fixed size and use those to create an output volume that is then going to be computed upon more. And again, these filters are where our weights are going to be. These filters are the neurons, basically, for this specific kind of network. So we slide it across, and like a standard neuron, we do our additions, our dot product, and get our activation. So that's going to be creating at the end is something called our activation map. That is going to be all of our outputs as another tensor. And what we're hoping is this volume is going to be shrinking over time, though at the same time might start pretty big at first because we're going to want to use multiple passes with different filters, quite possibly, or the same filter. What else here? Yeah, each activation map is going to represent some sort of pattern that we see in the image, just like we had before where neurons could represent like simple lines. We were talking about last time how neurons as shapes. This is going to be very much the same thing. These can represent simple and eventually hierarchically more complex patterns. So let's actually take a look at this visually. Here I have a simple filter. It's got size 3 by 3, and all of these are zeros and these are ones. What we do is we can slide it along the image at some fixed rate with that fixed size we gave it already, and it's going to be able to create this tensor here by just doing our normal additions and multiplications. In this case, the values in our filter are going to be our weights. So in this one, you see we're getting 4 because we're multiplying everything by 0 except for these 5 cells, and only these 4 have 1s in them, so we end up with our 4 value. Now, what do these filters do? There are certain known filter combinations that do different things. For example, if you just have the one there, it's going to end up making the same image. It's just an identity filter. If you were to want to do some sort of edge detection, want to strip out all of the parts of the image that aren't edges of things, all of these have an option of doing that. Sharpen, box blur, all of these different ones. But again, this is very much like how we talked about how a neuron can represent a logic gate. These weights, you're not going to be the one to like set these. You don't have to worry about what these would be because those are weights, and that's what we're going to be learning from. But it's a good idea to just know that these are the kind of standard toolkit that you can use over it, and the neural network will figure out its own toolkit though. Alright, so pooling. Pooling is going to be, unlike the conv part, the convolutional layers, where we're going to be learning from our image, their only task of them is to reduce this dimensionality of the image. So what's going to happen with these is we just have some sort of simple function, we divide up the image, and we try to reduce it into just keeping its important parts. So the one that's used most commonly is max pooling, maximum. There's also average and sum pooling. There's all sorts of different ones, just like we have activation functions, we have all sorts of different pooling functions. But so far, max pooling is generally seen to be one of the best ones. I'm sure an expert would tell you, no, there's some other one that's even better. There probably is, but the standard use is max pooling right now. And of course that means we're going to be taking the highest pixel within that little subgroup of the tensor. Here's a little example of that. We have this image tensor here. We have divided it into 2 by 2 blocks. Those are going to be, that's our pooling size. And we're going to be taking the maximum value of each of these to try to represent the image in a smaller way. So in this case, we'll say 20, 30, 112, and 37. And now we have a more compressed version of our image. We definitely can lose some data here, and that is a problem. But it's also going to make our neural network able to calculate things hopefully more accurately and definitely more efficiently. And at our end here, we're going to put some fully connected layers if we're doing something that would require them. If we are doing some sort of just image transformation with these neural networks, we're just turning one image to another image, then we don't need fully connected layers because that's just going to require us to flatten the image down and operate on that in a normal neural network way. But if we're doing something like classification, like we're trying to classify images, we're definitely going to put some fully connected layers at the end so we can actually use the outputs of our convolutional layers to really classify our images and decide what class they belong to. These are going to usually not be very numerous, only a few. The last one, of course, is probably going to be softmax, so you could do the whole, you can get the probability distribution amongst the classes. But yeah, we're mostly relying on the convolutions for convnets. So we'll put it all together here. This architecture is VGG19. We will be using it quite a bit later in the class. And what it's kind of showing here is how we string these operations together. We can have a convolution, we can have a number of convolutions, max pool, convolutions, max pool. We'll usually have layers of a few convolutions and then a pooling over and over again, and then fully connected layers all the way at the end. Any questions so far on all this?
So how would the concept of like back propagation apply here in the case of pooling?
Very good question. So it's actually going to work pretty much the same as we, before we had our neural networks as functions and we were able to back propagate using those functions. It's really going to work the same. The functions are a little different in that max pooling and convolutions, it's just a different kind of function, but it's still derivable usually. We're still using our same dot products and everything. We're just using it in a slightly different way, and it can still work. The back propagation is going to work in a very similar way to how it worked for your own neural network.
But would the filters change, like the filter of the pooling, would that change during back propagation, or would that remain the same?
Well, the filter, the convolution, the convolution will, that's going to change during back propagation.
Okay.
Yeah, those are exactly the same in that way as normal neurons. The weights are gonna change just the same. Pooling, there aren't any filters. It's just it's little pooling blocks, and those are gonna stay the same. Pooling should be a consistent operation. Yep.
So do you maintain like a single filter per convolution or multiple filters per convolution?
Usually you can do one, I guess, but usually it's going to be a bunch. You'll have, sometimes they'll all be the same. You'll have it go through multiple times.
Well, there you see the depth for every convolutional network. The depth is actually how many masks.
Gotcha.
Exactly, yeah. And down here we show just how many convolutions we're going through as we do that, because we're usually not going to have one convolution and then a pooling. We can, but it's not very efficient. Usually it'll be, like in this case, we have 2 convolutions pooling, 2 convolutions pooling, 4 convolutions pooling, So as VGG shows us, we can kind of string these operations together however we want them. Both the convolution and the pooling can help phase out noise and make the image more efficient to compute. It can lose good information. It's possible, but it's a risk we kind of have to go with. And usually the neural network gets pretty good at learning what information it should be keeping by adjusting the weights of the filters. And the convolutions are of course going to be finding these patterns that we talked about earlier, which are our neural networks as shapes kind of thing. That's going to find these, it's going to find the patterns that will best fit our image. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the patterns in the images. So I said earlier that it's going to find patterns in a hierarchical way. And what I mean by that is if the first bunch of convolutions finds somewhat simple patterns in the images, maybe it'll find that there's an edge here, there's kind of a line here, then the next layer is going to find more complicated things. It might find, oh, these lines are kind of in some sort of shape consistently on different parts of the image, or this curve is kind of making an eye shape, and so on and so on. Here's a bit of an example of that. We have this picture of a car that's learned on. You see this low level in our original convolutions. We're only seeing things like lines and different color gradients everywhere. Once we get to our mid-level features, we're seeing more complex shapes, little, almost not identifiable in the image by the human view, but definitely things that are more combinations of different shapes. And finally, we start to have things that we can actually see on the car somewhat. These more complex shapes that these neurons are representing and kind of mimicking. Here are some other patterns we can see from a ConvNet. These are definitely all later level convolutions. As you can see, it's got these images of the different things we're looking at here: beetle, flamingos, swan. Can everyone see this pretty well there? The light, yeah, it's a little contrast isn't great, but it is definitely, these aren't clear looking images of what we're looking for, but that's because the neural network is using this to kind of act as the mimic for our images. These are what we're using to check our images against.
Yeah, do you know how these images are actually obtained?
We are going to talk about that. That is, I think, 2 lectures from now.
Mm-hmm.
That's called activation maximization. But we'll definitely get to that. Good addition. So hyperparameters. Now we've seen that, by the way, was the whole structure. It's not a super complicated addition. It's definitely takes some time to get used to, especially actually using it. But the additions to it are just basically convolution and pooling. Now our hyperparameters, we have 3 main ones that deal with convolution. Of course, we're still dealing with everything we've talked about before, but the convolution ones we have to worry about are our filter size, our stride, and our padding. So, and if you wanted to throw in like the pooling shape too, that's fine as well, but we'll stick with the FSMP for right now. Filter size, that is going to be the size of our filter as it slides along the image. It's all different numbers of sizes you can do. Generally, smaller ones are going to save more information, of course, but are going to reduce the image less. Bigger ones are going to reduce the image a lot more, but might lose information. And of course, also, they can capture larger patterns. That's probably the biggest thing when dealing with filter size, is making sure that the filter is big enough to capture whatever patterns you're trying to make it find. Stride, that is going to be how far we move our filter every movement, because in our little GIF we had before, we're just moving it 1 by 1 by 1 across the image, but we can do it 2 by 2, or the whole filter size, just like 2 and then 2, you know. And lastly, padding, which is just putting zeros around the image so that we can correctly detect the edges of our image more successfully. So we'll start with filter size. As I said, it's to make sure it's, we don't want to have too big of a filter, because we're going to end up having we're gonna lose data that way. But we also don't wanna have too small of a filter because we're gonna be bogged down by noise and irrelevant data. Stride. The big thing with that is speeding up training. If you have a larger stride, you can usually train the neural network a lot faster. You need to make sure it fits the dimensions of the image, and that can be, you gotta also remember you might pad it, and then the dimensions of the image change a little bit, but otherwise it just speeds it up, and a lot of the time it'll be just as accurate. Sometimes it won't be, and then you have to worry about changing the stride back. Sometimes it'll be more accurate if you're getting over noise and everything like that. So a stride, of course, is going to help determine our output volume size, as is every one of these hyperparameters, really. If we're just sliding one by one, you can see we're going to end up with an output volume of that size, or 5 by 5. See, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slide down 1, 2, 3. Yeah. But if we had a little bit of a different slide factor there, we're moving 2 by 2. Now we've only got an output size of 3 by 3. Any questions on that so far? Awesome. I was reading this one recently. It's a good paper. If you change the slide as the neural network goes, you might not actually have to do pooling. This guy trained his neural network by having it just increase the slide over time per each layer, and by doing that he was able to not even have to worry about pooling, and it was just as accurate, trained a little faster. Nice little trick. Padding, we're going to have our zeros around our image. Let us, because if you've got your filter starting at the corner of the image, it's only going to go over that part of the image a little bit versus other parts where if it's got a slide of 1, it's going to go over multiple times in different spaces. You might not want that, in which case you are going to want to have padding so that it can go, more of it gets into the filter. Of course, you're then having to deal with larger output volumes, but it's a bit of a trade-off. And I don't know why I put that GIF in there. It has nothing to do with padding at all. Nice GIF though. Still works with slide kind of well. But this one I do remember why I put it in, because it does have padding. So we're going to have a bigger output volume by doing this, but we might want that. In this case, we want to have our output volume be the same as the image, and we can do that just by having our zero padding situation here. If you wanted to just have it operate on the image in some sort of way, but still output. Though I think the corners of the image might be a little wonky. I don't know. I'd have to think about that, but because the zero padding would make it less likely to have larger values. I don't know. But in summary, for this lecture, CNN's really powerful, really good at image processing. These are absolutely the state of the art right now, as far as machine learning image processing tasks go. And the main thing they're doing is they are getting rid of noise and unimportant data and building these hierarchical features that get more and more abstract as they go up and can better approximate the image. So that's all for the official lecture. We're going to have a little talk after this about the lab, but here's links. And we'll get more into ConvNext next week. So I think, should we have this on the video? Yeah, why not? Yeah. All right, so about the labs. First of all, I said this at the beginning, but we have a couple more people here. We're extending lab 1 to next week. we're also having on Thursday, kind of PSO, I think. I think it was 6 o'clock we decided.
Yeah,
Talked
so it's
about.
meeting outside of this room in case it's locked.
Yeah. Where we're just gonna go over the lab a little bit and see if we can help you guys out when you're stuck. Lab 2 is still gonna be released this week, but you have 3 weeks to do it. And I think it's a little easier personally than Lab 1 is. That's the main part of the logistics there. So what were most people getting stuck on for Lab 1?
So I was able to do like the lab like without the extra credit, so I finished that part. But the extra credit part where you had to implement like an n layer neural network, like given n.
Oh, that's hard, yeah.
Yeah, so I was thinking like how will I keep use the chain rule to keep finding derivatives again and again, right, continuously, right? So if it's n layer.
Yeah, that's part of what you'll have to do. So let me pull up that slide in those 2. Yeah, so this slide right here is most definitely your friend when it comes to backpropagation. I suggest following in code, kind of following it in a pseudocode kind of layout. So the one you're going to want to focus on here is getting the layer 1 error, because you start with the layer 2 error, obviously, that's going to be your output. But when you're getting your layer 1 error there, what you're doing is you're, by the chain rule, getting the dot product of our weights for that layer that we're working for, or for the next layer, and multiplying by the delta of that layer, or dot producting, sorry, by the delta of that layer. So you're going to do that for everyone going back. I won't get too much more in depth with it from there, because it's kind of a challenge. So give it a go, but it's going to be very similar in form to this second layer of work. The big difference is, instead of using layer 1 out, which is actually just going to end up being your input, you're going to be using whatever layer was before that. Definitely give it a try, but it's understandable if it's trouble, because it's a hard extra credit, which is why it was an extra credit.
For the TensorFlow part, there was also this extra credit where you had to get it to 99%, right?
Did I say 99%?
Yes.
That's a lot.
Yeah, 12 points of extra credit, get accuracy to 99%. You may use any technique you
I was
wish.
able to get it to 98, but 99 was it's not.
Yeah, 99 is hard. I think you can get 99 with just a feed forward. You get a lot of extra credit points too, though. 12's a lot.
Did you want us to like use something like dropouts or some extra features? Like
Dropouts would help. Yeah.
Okay.
You can that's why I put any technique. Yeah, you can use
Okay.
dropouts for sure. That might help.
Okay. But I was just
Definitely.
looking online also, and people were telling that they needed CNNs to get it to 99, and using just a fully connected network, it was difficult to get 99.
I think you can get it. I think it is difficult though.
Okay.
I think you can get it to 99
Okay.
with just the fully connected. It is hard though, which is why you won't have to use just a fully connected for the next lab. But yeah. Anything else as far as the normal lab? What was causing trouble?
I think me and Sri are definitely going to be working out tonight, and then as more questions arise, we're just going to be bringing that to the session tomorrow.
Okay.
Probably be a good move.
Okay. One thing I wanted to show.
By the way, are you using your own computer or you?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm doing
I found that's the best way of doing it. If you,
I think so too.
For the first part of the custom neural network one, when the epochs are like 1 lakh,
Oh,
It's-
don't trust my number of epochs I put in there.
Okay, because that takes a really long time to run.
Yeah, that takes a long time to run. So in my code, I think what I did is I had it as that earlier, and then I had it because it's a parameter to the
Right.
function,
Mhm.
and it just put the default as that.
Like if
So
around 100 works, right? Like it gives 86% for around 100.
yeah. You don't have to do it that many.
Yeah, okay.
I think I have it working with like 50 or something.
Okay. 60 was sort of the range. It's crossed 85 for me.
Yeah. But to say about that, the skeleton code comes from working code. It is not itself working code, if you know what I mean there. It's, especially if it's like a default parameter argument, you change that for sure. That's why it's a parameter. Change that to whatever you want it to be. You don't even have to change it in the default. You change it when you're running it, but you know. Yeah, it can be, you don't have to stick to anything really in the skeleton code except vaguely having the pipeline somewhat similar. I wanted to show this though. So I had mine run I remember I had a lot of trouble getting things to match dimensionally when you're doing like dot products and stuff. So this is the output of the network as it goes on with the different variables you'll need to be saving, specifically during training. So of course we have our shapes we're getting from the data set. We have our shapes of our different weight tensors, our input shapes. Here you might notice we're using a mini batch size of 100, which is why we have 100 going down there. So yeah, this is not, this isn't like super important, but you know, if you want to take a look at it just to make sure everything's matching up right. If you're having dimensional issues, this is approximately what it should look like. You might have different mini batch size or whatever, but you know. Yeah, I think that's all I have for, probably talk about project 2 a little. Let's do that. Yeah, I think I said I'd release it today. Technically I did, even though it was like 1 in the morning today. It's not due for a while, it's due in like a month. Because I wanted to give you time to work on it, especially the moving forward and everything else. And the next project we're working on, style transfer, so I decided this is due the day we're starting style transfer. So this project is going to be, I think, pretty easy to complete, but if you want to go for the extra credits, it's going to be real hard. First of all, I feel a little bad about this, but I kind of like it too. So, if you get the highest accuracy in the class on the fine CIFAR 100, you get an extra 15%. This is war now. The basics of this lab, though, you're going to be creating 2 neural nets, one standard one, both of which you can use Keras for. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you from scratch do a CNN. Create these 2 neural networks, the standard one and the CNN. You probably already created the standard one in lab 1, so you can just transfer that over. CNN might be a little harder, but it's, we'll talk about tomorrow, or not tomorrow. We'll talk about next Wednesday how you do that in Keras. I'm kind of just releasing this lab a week early, think of it that way. As far as getting full points goes, you have to do a couple things with Matplotlib. You create a couple graphs, do a tiny write-up, had some additions to the pipeline. The main thing though is getting an amount of accuracy for each of these. Now this is with either neural network, and by that I mean by the CNN, because the ANN is not going to be able to do a lot of this. These are the baseline ones. That gets you full points. If you can get 99, 92, 70, 50, and 35. And I got those just basically by what I was able to get on mine. However, I know you can go farther than that, and I think 50's tough. I don't know if you'll be able to get that, but 45 definitely you can get to, even on the CIFAR 100 fine. If you can get 50, that'd be pretty cool, because these images are a little harder. Basically, these are slightly bigger images, and they're color, so you have to deal with that. And of course, we also have to worry about that there are 100 classes, which makes things quite a bit harder. And yeah, the extra 15% for
So just so I'm reading this right, so if you had 47%, then you would get plus 10 because they stack as you go down that.
Yeah, they
Okay,
stack.
okay.
Yeah, they stack. Yeah, if you got 50 and you were the highest in the class, you're getting
Like plus 30.
yeah plus 30 extra credit.
Okay.
But that's really hard. So if
Yeah.
you can do that, you deserve it. I have a couple other little extra credits down here, mostly just smaller ones here. If you can add pre-processing with random crops, in other words, you can just, with every image, you're going to augment your data by having that image cropped several times to some size. That, I don't know if it'll help or not, but definitely try it. And I think there's a Curios utility that does that for you. But, well, that's the extra credit part. You have to figure that out. Also coded an option to have your CNN save and load. If you're doing these higher level extra credits, please do this one, because otherwise I don't want to have to try to run yours and then be like, it didn't give that credit the accuracy you said, and they're like, oh, well, I could try it with this random seed or something. Make it save the weights so that I can just load the weights. But yeah, you can get a lot of extra credit on this one. Mostly, I want this to be kind of a playground of classification. You're going to be using all these different data sets, CIFAR 10, CIFAR 100 coarse and fine, the two different MNIST ones, and seeing how your networks, both standard and CNN, stack up against each other and on the different networks. Any questions on that, or? All right, I think we're good for today. Class dismissed.